Hello everyone and welcome to Medicated Housewife DIY, where crafting and mental health come together. My name is Sarah. In today's DIY video, 3 amazing Pinterest-inspired fall DIYs you need to see. Designer-inspired fall decor pumpkins, easy Dollar Tree DIYs. We are making 3 very easy Pinterest-inspired designer fall decor pumpkins using mostly Dollar Tree supplies. Trendy and edgy artists like Kusama and Jonathan Adler are today's inspiration. You won't believe how quick and easy you can make designer-inspired fall decor for your stylish home using $1.25 foam pumpkins. You won't want to miss this. I think you're going to like them, so stick around and let's go make some stuff and jump right into this. To begin with, for DIY number 1, I'm using this white foam pumpkin from Dollar Tree, and I removed the sticker from the bottom. We're going to be painting this entire pumpkin using Apple Barrel white gloss acrylic paint, which I will link for you in the description box below. I paint the whole pumpkin minus the stem, which we will be covering up later anyway, and then I let that white paint fully dry. We're doing a dot painting technique using these painting sticks that I already had in my stash, but I will find a similar set of them to link for you below. And all they really are assorted plexiglass rods that have flat ends, and that's for dipping and then dotting on paint. This is one of the inspirational pumpkins by the artist Kusama. You can also Google Kusama, that's Kusama, to see other pieces of art, but this is one of their dotted pumpkins so that you can see what we'll be doing. Ours is going to be similar but not identical by any means. Starting with a large circle, I dip it into the Apple Barrel black gloss acrylic paint, and the first dot is going to be in the center of the raised part of the pumpkin, and then I do another the same size right next to it. We are going to have to dot paint this pumpkin in sections so that each section can dry before we're moving on. This way we won't be smearing all of our dots while they're wet. I follow that up with a slightly smaller circle that goes underneath and then also above the center circle that I just made. I continue on using smaller and smaller circles in a graduating pattern toward the top and also the bottom of that pumpkin section, as you can see me do here. Next, I pick out the next group of circle sizes that I want to use, and I follow the pattern of the largest in the middle, flanked on either side by smaller and smaller circles. You can use whatever pattern of circles makes you happy. I mean, I was looking to get a similar pattern to the original piece, so I'm going largest in the middle with smaller and smaller toward the top and bottom, but honestly, you should do however appeals most to you. And just a note about dot painting, your circles don't always come out perfect, so sometimes you may need to use a tiny brush to help fill in or to even out one of the circles. Just remember that none of your circles need to be perfect, because regardless, the overall look of the finished piece is still going to look really cool, so please, please don't sweat it. Now I use the next group of smaller circles to line the outside of my rows that have larger circles, and I honestly made the rules up as I went. The only thing you need to try to do with this is to create some sort of pattern, like either larger circles to smaller or vice versa. So I used the smaller circles on the outside of my larger ones. I then grabbed a group of really tiny dotting tools in various tiny sizes, and I used those smaller dots to surround some of the larger dots and kind of make outlines around them and patterns within that throughout each row. And as I said before, you don't have to follow any rules as long as you create some kind of a repetitive pattern with your dots. You can see later on that not all of my rows had the same sizes in them, but as I said before, in the end, they really don't make a difference because the overall look is still really great. As each section dries, I move on to another couple of sections, just trying to mimic similar patterns as the other sections I've already done, mainly by using my largest dots toward the middle, with smaller sizes going up and down the sides of those, the middle, going up to the top and down to the bottom. I think you will find that dot painting is extremely relaxing. I don't know why, but I find it really therapeutic, and frankly, who couldn't use a little bit of that? So it is all good. I continue the dotting until the entire pumpkin is full, and just a note, smudges and mess ups will happen, but if you just wait for the dots to dry, you can go in with more paint and you can cover those smudges and you can neaten up your circles so no one has to see your mistakes. They can continue thinking that you are perfect. I needed to make a stem for my pumpkin, so using a blank pumpkin as a model, I grabbed some DAS, that's DAS air dry clay, I will link it for you below, and I shaped a thick pumpkin stem right onto the top of that pumpkin. And I used some of the clay tools from Dollar Tree to make some ridges and grooves in that stem. I also popped a toothpick into the underside of it to make it easier to apply to the pumpkin once it was dry. I then let that stem dry overnight before painting it a solid glossy black. And this is how DIY number 1, my Kusama inspired pumpkin, turned out. I think this pumpkin looks so cool. I don't have much experience with dot painting, but that will definitely change because I enjoyed painting this so much. I just can't wait to do another dot painting project. I love this pumpkin. I think because it's unusual, but it's really visually interesting, and I think it attracts the eye to it. And hey, who doesn't want that? But I want to know what you think. Let me know in the comments how you feel about this designer-inspired pumpkin. DIY number 2 begins with another foam pumpkin from Dollar Tree. This time we are painting it using apple barrel acrylic paint in the shade Warm Buff. And I ended up giving this 2 coats of paint, and then I waited for that paint to dry. I cut 3 or 4 pieces of nautical rope from Dollar Tree and then twisted them tightly together in the middle with some glue on them just to help hold it together. I also loosely unraveled some of the ends on the top of both the top and the bottom of the bunch of the rope pieces, and then using some tacky glue from Dollar Tree, I glued the middle of my rope bunch to the middle of the pumpkin so that the looser frayed pieces hung over the top and the bottom of the pumpkin, as you can see me do here. Next, I put some Jot white glue from Dollar Tree into a bowl, and using a paintbrush, I brushed the glue generously onto pieces of the frayed rope ends, and I used the glue to bend and to sort of mold the frayed pieces onto the pumpkin. And I did this first with the bottom pieces to try and make them look like tree roots that would be under a thick tree trunk. And then I turned the pumpkin over and did the same thing to the top frayed pieces, but in that case I left some of those a little thicker toward the middle so that they would resemble tree branches on top of a tree. And in case you haven't figured out the direction I'm going with this, I was trying to make a realistic kind of 3D tree, if that makes any sense. Once all that glue dried, I grabbed my Folk Art antique wax, and I'll link that for you below, and I used it to darken up my tree on the trunk and on the roots and the branches, just to make them look more realistically tree-like with bark pieces and stuff like that. Now I needed leaves for the top of my tree, and I had some of these plastic leaves from an older Dollar Tree greenery pick. So I used a scissors, I cut off a bunch of those plastic leaves, and then using my hot glue gun, I carefully glued the individual leaves all over the top branch part of my tree. And I just was building up the leaves more and more until I felt the tree was full enough. Lastly, I grabbed some moss from Dollar Tree and used my hot glue to attach it sparingly to the root part of my tree, just because I felt like it needed a little bit more green. And off camera, I hot glued a small wood tree stump from Dollar Tree to the top to be the pumpkin stem. And this is how DIY number 2, my Tree of Life pumpkin, turned out. Now, I actually have never seen a 3D Tree of Life represented on a pumpkin, but hey, there's a first time for everything. I think this pumpkin is really adorable. I love how whimsical it is, kind of like one of those little fairy houses that people build into tree trunks or something like that. And I truthfully can't help but be reminded of the Keebler elves when I look at this, but maybe I'm just hungry, I don't know. But I want to know what you think. Let me know in the comments if you love this little 3D Tree of Life pumpkin, and do you get a sudden craving for cookies when you look at it too? Inquiring minds want to know. DIY number 3 begins with another foam pumpkin from Dollar Tree. This time we are painting it with Apple Barrel Black Gloss acrylic paint. Everything but the stem, because we will be covering up that stem again. While the paint was drying, I'm using some DOS air dry clay and this small lip mold that I had in my stash, but I will look for a comparable mold to link below for you because I can't remember where I got that. I pressed the clay into the lip mold, making several pairs of lips in 2 to 3 different sizes, and I wasn't sure how many and what exact sizes I was going to need to use, so I just made a bunch of them so that I would have more than enough to use. The inspiration for this pumpkin is the designer Jonathan Adler, and this is an example of a couple of his home furnishings. He's really edgy and quirky, and he's definitely worth you Googling and looking at some of his stuff. I also made another stem out of clay to fit the top of my pumpkin using a blank pumpkin as a model, and once that stem dried, off camera, I painted it with Folk Art Treasure Gold acrylic paint. I'll link that for you below. Once my paint is dry, I take the clay lips that are still not set, so they're still flexible and soft, and I'm going to carefully glue them to the pumpkin using Tacky glue from Dollar Tree. And I didn't have any particular order or configuration of how I was going to glue the lips on. I just basically glued them all around the pumpkin, and then I waited for the glue to set and the clay to fully dry, which was overnight. Once the clay was dry, I carefully painted all the lips with Folk Art Treasure Gold acrylic paint, and I will link that for you below. Once the lips were dry, I used a tiny thin little brush and just a little bit of black paint just in that middle crease of the lips, and that was just to give them a little bit of depth and some emphasis. Lastly, I'm using Decor Triple Thick Gloss all over the entire pumpkin, and that's to seal it and to give it a really shiny, glossy finish. Off camera, I attached that clay stem I had made and had painted earlier. And this is how DIY number 3, my lip-covered pumpkin, turned out. Now, I know this is not for everyone, but I think this is so cool looking. It totally reminds me of my inspiration piece, and personally, I've never seen another pumpkin like it, so it feels pretty original too. But I want to know what you think about this quirky, edgy pumpkin. Let me know in the comments if you would ever display something like this in your home. And these are all 3 of my Pinterest-inspired fall DIY pumpkins. These were all so much fun to make, and I love learning a new technique like dot painting and realizing just how much I enjoy it. That was so much fun. The Tree of Life is something that is so my style, so that's a winner for me, and the lip-covered pumpkin is just, well, it's just cool, in my opinion. Let me know in the comments which one of these 3 is a pumpkin that you'd like to try. I hope you enjoyed this Medicated Housewife DIY, and if you did, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing. It really helps out my channel. Once again, I really appreciate you watching, and a very big thank you to my subscribers. I'm so glad that all of you are here. And until next time, I'm the Medicated Housewife, and crafting is my medication.